On this Saturday cast, I'm joined by an executive leader and member of our listening community who's leveraged personal clarity to deliver business results. Perhaps more importantly, doing that while making significant improvements to employee engagement. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 357.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. Leaders aren't born, they're made. And this weekly show gives you access to the practical wisdom that will empower you to become a better leader. And this is the monthly Saturday cast. About once a month, I air a special episode here on a Saturday. That's a chat with one of our Academy members or listeners. The next episode is still coming on Monday, so this is a bonus show. And the Saturday casts are sponsored and brought to you by the Coaching for Leaders Academy. The Academy is a year-long cohort of participant leaders who work personally with me to become substantially more effective in talent development, effective decision-making, consistent innovation, self-organization, and efficient learning. You can discover more and get alerted about opportunities to apply for the Academy in the future by visiting coachingforleaders.com/academy. Today's guest on the Saturday cast is someone who is very much a fellow traveler on this journey with all of us. When I first heard from Jeff, I was just captivated by his story and how much he's utilized from what he's learned from the show. And I think one of the things that Jeff and I will talk about today is just the importance of, while we're all on this journey in our own way through life and through work and leadership, the importance of being able to connect and learn from each other. So I am thrilled to be able to welcome to the Saturday cast, Jeff Phipps. Jeff is the Managing Director and General Manager for ADP in the UK and Ireland, and he's been listening to the show for a while. Jeff, I'm so glad to welcome you to Coaching for Leaders.
Hi, Dave. It's great to be on.
Let's maybe start this conversation from something you told me when we started talking originally of just kind of what brought you to this point. You, like many people who listen to the show, have been very successful in your career. You've been in leadership for a long time. And yet you came to a place a few years back where you were getting the sense that maybe something needed to change. Take us back there. What was the starting point for you?
So I was in a role that took me over to, I'm based in the UK, and the role took me over to Germany on a weekly basis. So externally, it looked like I was in a really successful, role where I was flying into a different country each week. But in reality, the job was really difficult, and I felt quite isolated, quite lonely out there, and it was a real challenge. So that's essentially where I was starting to feel, what do I do? I was in this role. I felt because I was away from the UK, I was missing my family. I was also lacking, being able to keep my network warm here. So I was concerned about exactly what I did to solve this, and I was talking to my dad about it one Christmas and looking for some advice, and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I was irritated by this question. It was like, "Dad, why? I'm looking for some really good advice here, and you're asking me this trivial question." And then I realized I couldn't answer him. Unpacking that and realizing that it was a deeper question than I'd first thought about, and it was actually a question that was saying to me, "Where do you want to go with your life?" Not just, well, what's the next step, or what do you do to move yourself out of this position?
As you started to wrestle with that, and so much creativity and learning in life happens from a place of discomfort, where did you start?
So I thought about something I'd wanted to do for a while, and I'd had a family, but I'd harbored the idea of going and doing an MBA. I was a bit concerned because I think I was 46 at the time, and I thought, I feel like I'm maybe past the moment where this would be a good idea. But I decided to look. I'm fortunate. I've got a great business school quite locally to me, and I decided that I'd go to an open day. I remember driving into the gates of the school, Dave, and thinking, are there going to be a bunch of millennials there who are going to look at me and go, what is he thinking? What on earth is he doing here? And the opposite was the case. I was just, they kind of had me at hello. I found it incredibly welcoming. I found that those nerves, those those fears that I maybe had about embarking on that just melted away very, very quickly.
I run into a lot of people in both my professional and personal circles that I find, not everybody, but a lot of people who they go through an experience like going through graduate school and they've learned a lot and they've got a lot more books to cite and they've got a lot more ideas, but they haven't necessarily changed a lot of their worldview and mindset on learning and on growth. And when I talk with you, I get the sense that you really had some pretty dramatic shifts going through that experience. What's different about you today that wasn't true before you started that?
I think that what was particularly powerful about the course that I did was there was a big focus on personal development as well as the usual modules that you get in an MBA. And I found that I really embraced the personal development part. So we did some work such as do a personal timeline and look back at your whole life and really get a sense of how you are a product of your experiences, that what has led you to become what you are now. And I found personally that when I looked at that, it helped me really crystallize my values and allowed me to really develop, I would say, a clear understanding of what my leadership philosophy was. And importantly, I stressed that it was what I really believed myself, not what somebody else had prescribed, but something that I had managed to develop for myself. And that's really become the foundation of everything I've done since then.
When you think about that clarity, how do you think about it for yourself now, as far as how you think about yourself as a leader in that leadership development journey?
That foundation has three parts to me. The first one is really appreciating and committing to a lifelong journey of learning. If we want to stay physically fit, we have to go out and run, ride a bike, go for a swim, and we have to commit to doing that forever. If we want to do the same in terms of our careers, I think we've got to make a similar investment in our minds. So I think a lifelong journey of learning is something that if you're really serious about taking yourself forward, you have to commit to, but it's not going to be as much of a heavy lift as doing an MBA. It can be as simple as committing that you're going to listen to your podcast, Dave, or you're going to read a book on a regular basis, but making sure that becomes a disciplined part of your life is the first part. So I think that's the first part for me. The second part was a commitment to diversity. I learned quite quickly that if I'm going to encourage a diverse organization, why is that happening? And for me, I realized that through this work of my timeline, that it was right in the beginning, early stage of my life. My mum and dad had got divorced. My mum had really struggled. She'd been a single parent. And so this diversity for me is in all forms. So not just gender and race and disability, but also about social diversity as well. I feel like I'm the underdog that managed to win through. And so I feel I was able to see why that was important to me, why I believed in diversity for a long time, but unpacking it and seeing actually it goes right back to your childhood and your childhood experiences really was quite powerful for me. And so that was the second part of what I considered to be an important tenet of my leadership philosophy. And the third one was that I think businesses cannot just be leeches on society. They have to be clear about what the role is that they play in society, both in terms of the products and services that they offer and making sure that they're clear on how does that serve society. But also as employers, we educate people, we give them careers, we allow taxes to be paid and people to live their lives. But we also work in a community as well. And I think we need to be part of those communities. So I thought that third part was really the completed that triangle of my leadership philosophy. But I was able to really understand that and why I felt that way and piece that together through that learning experience.
It is so interesting, isn't it, how our childhoods do influence so much of our value set on things that, become really critical later in life. And it was interesting to me when I was first hearing about your childhood experiences and how many struggles you went through and thinking about that in the context of diversity. And I was also interested in some of the things you told me about that you'd gained from the show. And I know Therese Huston in particular, who was on the show a while back, changed some of your thinking around this as well, even though you've always had that kind of diversity in the background of your own experience. Tell me about what it is you discovered from her.
I thought her on the show and the book, which is How Women Decide, was really enlightening for me. It's very easy to try to be empathetic without realizing how you can be just patronizing if you're not careful. And you have to invest in understanding what it's like for people who are different to you. So that book was a major first step for me in really getting a perspective on the differences between men and women and how they think and some of the stresses and challenges that they face. I remember being at an event, and I was actually the only guy on the table, and there was a speaker talking about some of the challenges that women have is that they will make a suggestion and it'll not get acknowledged, and a few minutes later a guy might repeat the same suggestion and he will get the accolade for the suggestion. And I thought, that's ridiculous. And I looked at them and said, that doesn't really happen, does it? And they both nodded at me and went, oh yeah, that happens to us all the time. And I think that was the start of, I learned a lot from that book, but it got my curiosity into really probing and understanding what was going on in the minds of not just women, but also, I think I said to you, I did a sponsored bike ride last year, which was to ride from Boston to New York as a fundraiser for the LBGT community. But for me, it was about getting the opportunity to speak with people about their experiences. You can't just read about those things. You have to really go to some lengths, I think, to put yourself close to those people and try to really understand what's going on. So I think that anything that we can do as leaders to have a better understanding, to be more empathetic to that diverse pool of people that come into our places of work every day, has got to be helpful for us to be able to connect with them and be better leaders. And sometimes it doesn't need to be a significant thing. I think that one of the most powerful things I've found is just when you're getting yourself a coffee and there's someone else there, if you don't know them, then say, how's your day? How are things going? It's amazing how people open up and talk about what's going on in their world. And sometimes it's about things, very, very human things that are happening in people's lives, such as somebody who's caring for someone who's sick, someone who's got an illness. Sadly, there are things that happen that are just happening every day. And if you don't take the time to understand what's going on in people's lives, then there's a real danger that you might misjudge them. You may judge them on performance without understanding the real context. And so I'm always reminding myself of looking for that. So sometimes it can be quite a significant thing. You get the opportunity to do something larger, but sometimes it's really just that, being curious about people and what's going on in their mind, how they tick. And if you understand that, I think you've got the basis for a relationship, you've got the basis to communicate with them, and you've got the basis to lead them.
We had Simon Sinek on the show a while back talking about starting with why, which is, of course, just part of his brilliant work around leadership. What you were saying earlier about the three parts that really emerged for you for your own leadership, that third piece of the organization doing good for the world, in addition to, of course, being successful and hitting the numbers, it strikes me as very much a part of that start with why message. And I know it's been influential to you, and you'd mentioned to me, I think when we talked, that there was just some ways that's influenced strategy for you and within the organization and how you've thought about your role as a leader. Tell me more about that.
I think when I started at ADP that I was surprised because I started asking my team, what do you think our purpose is? And I was frankly disappointed with what they said. They said, well, we're kind of here to make money, aren't we? And I thought, hold on a second. Now, we are looking after people's welfare in the sense that what we do makes sure that, huge numbers of people get paid.
Yeah.
And think about the consequences if that didn't happen. Think about the social value of what we do. Think about how you would feel if your bank suddenly called you and said, your paycheck didn't arrive this month, right? And that, for me, I would certainly hope, if there's one thing I've changed from an organizational point of view, I would really hope now that people take a real pride in the service they provide by what we do as a business. Of course, that service has a charge to it and it allows us to be what we are. But I think just remembering why we do it and the impact that we have is a really important part of what we do. So I would say that in terms of what we do, maybe on the flip side, Dave, in terms of how we behave as an organization, I mean, I'm blessed with a group of people that almost see charity activity as a competitive sport. Those things, again, are not just about doing things because it's some kind of cheap PR trick. For me, it's much deeper than that. That's, again, aligning with people's values. They want to work at an organization that aligns with their values, that cares about society, cares about the community that it operates in, and does that not as a PR stunt, but because they're saying, hey, we share your values and we want to conduct ourselves in a way that you feel part of something which isn't just a money-making machine, but actually has that social value.
We have talked often over the years on the show about the importance of self-awareness and personal leadership first for leaders. And I think this is just a great example of how your commitment to your own leadership development and developing this value has now inspired, some of the culture and the language in the organization, the expectation as far as how the organization shows up in the world. And that's really cool that you've had that some of that influence. I'm curious too about just some of the things you're seeing and the trends out there. And I recall you saying to me that just thinking about this also in the standpoint of like bringing people into the organization. And one of the things I think you said is that when you sit down with interviews with candidates, you oftentimes are disappointed in some of the things you hear from candidates. Tell me more about that.
One of the questions, and anyone who comes for an interview now is now going to know the answer, right? But one of the questions
we'll make sure they don't hear this.
Yeah, one of the questions I often ask people is, what motivates you? And, I often hear what I would say are very, I guess, sanitized answers. And every time I hear them, it's like a little part of me dies. It's like, tell me you do this because you want to send your kids to a great school, because you want to make your mum proud, or because you want, security for your family. Don't tell me that you want to be part of a, large prestigious organization, because I don't think that's what makes people tick. I really want to understand what makes people tick. And I think there's a lot of discussion, in the world at the moment about authentic leadership. But I think we've got to cut through, I think, a lot of this corporate speak and actually talk to people as human beings and be really open about what's going on in our lives, what we want from lives. And when we do that, we've got the basis for trust. And so when I hear somebody who comes in who talks to me about something they're passionate about, and I thinking of a colleague and friend right now where that was the case, where they came for an interview and they just were completely honest about their family and what they wanted to do for them. And for me, the comforting part of that is that I then know what their motivation is, and I believe it, and I know that what's going to keep them going when they're having a bad day. When someone gives me the stock kind of corporate answer, then you have no idea of what's going to keep them going when the going gets rough.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I think that a lot of times people think that that's what people want to hear. And I suppose in their defense, there's probably organizations and leaders out there that are looking for that kind of stock corporate answer, but there is a deeper and greater purpose for doing things, right? And it kind of comes back to Simon Sinek again, right? Starting with why. Yeah. Why are you doing this? Why are you in this in the first place? And it's cool that you're thinking about that from the very beginning of those relationships in order to kind of create the culture by bringing in the people that are already thinking that way at the beginning, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Oh. So I want to ask you about something else too. You and I talked about humor, and you talked about being human and the importance of relationships. One of the folks who was on the show a while back was David Nihill, episode 245, yep. How to Engage with Humor. You latched on to some of his work and said that was really helpful for you in thinking about relationships and connecting with people. How was that helpful?
Well, we've done a lot of work. So we had something a while back. We were getting feedback from the employees that they they really didn't understand our strategy. And so we did what all good leadership teams did and just started to produce more PowerPoint slides. And when we realized that didn't work out too well for us, we started to scratch our heads and figure out we're going to do something differently here. And we embarked on an exercise which was about not just explaining the strategy, but also explaining the culture. And I would actually touch on, David Marquet and the Turn the Ship Around book as part of that, really thinking, because strategy is great, but without the culture in the organization to drive it, I think if purpose is the why, then culture is the how. And that was useful. Now, what David Nihill did for me was really to help sharpen up some skills around storytelling, which I think is something you've covered at some point on the show. I can't remember quite with who, but I'm sure there's been a recent show on it with recently.
Yeah, indeed.
And he really helped as somebody that gave some really good skills and coaching on how to deliver your messages well, where to, how to get that polish. It was fascinating to me. He's a stand-up comedian. He said that every minute of a stand-up comedy routine takes 21 hours of preparation. So I don't have 21 hours to prepare, so I'm looking for every shortcut I can find. And so his sense of using storytelling, using humor, but also thinking about where you were going to emphasize things was very helpful to me. He was also, I connected with him as well and shared some of what I've done, and he just came back with a humorous line. So it was also nice to be able to connect with him as well and share how it had been useful to him.
There's so much about that conversation with David in episode 245 that really goes way beyond just humor. I mean, I was frankly surprised in a good way, because I didn't know what to expect going into that conversation, and reviewed his work obviously, but there was so much strategy and communication and storytelling strategy that came out of that conversation that I have used a whole bunch of times. In fact, I think I used it that month, and it was we had a really successful marketing campaign with a project we were doing as a result of using some humor where we had never done it before. And it's really amazing, like, if you just stop for a minute and think about, like, how could we approach this a little differently and a little more humanly than every other organization is doing it out there, or every other team is doing it. And it really just gets people's attention.
Well, humor is human, right? And so, again, if you're going to strike trust and relationship, you're going to have to be human in how you do it. And I think if we, there's times when humor is not appropriate, but I think that, used in the right balance, it can really make things, it can help people to remember things. It can help them to embed things in their mind. But you can use humorous stories to really engage people. Think about it. If you use a humorous story to explain something to somebody, there's a good chance they're going to be really engaged in listening to that. You go back to the PowerPoint slides and a bunch of charts and spreadsheets, and people are going to start looking at their phones or nodding off. I think that's the danger.
You mentioned someone else a moment ago is one of my favorite conversations from the last few years, David Marquet, who's just done some brilliant work in leadership and language. And he came on the show, episode 241, talking about how to turn followers into leaders. What did you learn from David that's been useful to you?
Oh, one thing I'd say, which is so important to me, is put the right people in the room. And I think there's a lot of experience I've had in previous companies where the tendency has been to put the people with the most senior job titles in the room. And very often they're the people who actually who are least well equipped to really understand what's going on. So, I think that David Marquet's book about turning followers into leaders is essentially about recognizing who has the right combination of skills, knowledge, competency to make the decision. And so I think turning that around, and saying, this is what I intend to do I think in his case, it was the people in the ship would go to the officer or captain and say, I intend to do X.
Yeah.
Is really powerful, because it just changes the whole nature. And I think it takes a unnecessary hierarchy out of an organization. And I want people to be, quite frankly, instructing me as to have that conversation earlier today with somebody about, you need to look at me as a resource and tell me what to do. I'm fine with that. And don't think that you can't, just because of a job title or some hierarchy that doesn't need to exist in a really, really rigid formal way, that you can't make it clear that, Jeff, I need you to do these 3 things for my customer. This is important. I need you to do it. And getting people feeling comfortable with that without feeling like they're going to get into trouble or they're overstepping the mark is, I think that's hard. It comes back to the cultural thing again. But I think when you get there, it's just wonderful to see the confidence of more junior people, seeing them getting the opportunity to take part in things that they wouldn't have done, and therefore accelerate their learning, but also their impact on the organization much, much quicker than if you stick to the old-fashioned hierarchical approach.
There's so much about servant leadership that comes out in what you just said, and in Marquet's work too, around, there's this traditional view of a lot of, classic organizations of, everyone's there to serve the CEO or the board or whatever. And what I hear in what you're saying, and I think so many, really talented leaders are doing, is looking at it the other way around. Like, my job is here to serve the employees, and the employees are here to serve the people we're here.
I was going to say, I'd rather draw the org chart upside down,
Yeah. And some organizations have done that. And and a lot of people give lip service to that. But to really change, the thing that you've done, and Marquet is so brilliant at, is like changing the language around that you're using in order to really set the expectation within the organization that, this is not I'm requesting permission from you. And there may be times and places where that kind of language is appropriate, but the default is much more, here's what I intend to do, and here's how you can serve me and help me to really serve the organization and people well. And it's really cool that you've latched onto that in your organization.
The only thing I would say, though, is that it's a journey, and it takes time, and it comes back to having that tenacity to keep going, because I think that there can be a tendency to maybe read a book, listen to an author and go, I'm going to practice that. But some of these things take quite a while to really bed in an organization. And people often at first are sort of skeptical. Does he really mean this? Or is this just a rouse and it's all going to go back to the way it was? So be prepared to be in it for the long haul. That would be the advice I would give people.
Like so many other things we do in leadership, right? The real work takes time and consistency over time. That actually leads into, one other thing I want to ask you. You are a very busy executive. You've got a team of, I think, well over 1,000 people, if I'm remembering right. And one of the people that came up in our conversation as well early on too was Cal Newport, and thinking about deep work. And yep. I know this is something that a lot of our listeners struggle with too, because they're, virtually everyone who listens to the show is, very busy, has a lot of demands on their time. What did you find from Cal, or what have you done in practice that's helped you as a busy executive to be able to make the space to do the kind of work you need to be doing on a regular basis?
So you know this. You know that I was fearful about reading Cal's book because
You did tell me that, yeah.
I did, right? The idea I'm not somebody, at least the idea of shutting myself away and doing the deep work side of things without human contact is not my idea of the ideal way to spend a time. I'm quite a sociable person, like to be interacting with people. And so I really resisted that book for quite a while. And I regret resisting it for as long as I did, because like a lot of things, if you look at the people that speak on the show, I don't think that the right thing to do is try to copy or emulate every single thing that they're saying, because we're all different and we're all in different points in our life. But I think there's almost always something you can learn from everybody. And what I got from Cal was the being aware of what you are doing that's adding no value. And, that can be as simple as you're watching TV, but you're not really interested in the show. So why don't you turn the TV off? And having that conscious awareness of what I'm doing now, is that taking me to, where I want to go? And if it's not, do I want to do something about it? And so I think that I've chipped away at a lot of things and been frankly quite surprised how much time is wasted on things that had no value, serve no purpose. And that doesn't mean to say, by the way, that you can't have a chat with somebody in the corridor because you become so obsessed with your own personal productivity. I don't think that's the way it should be interpreted. But I think that there are, chunks of our lives that are not serving us well. And I was aware of those. As I think I said to you, as I went through my studies, I realized I had to cut out things like watching TV. I still listen to music, but I don't listen to the radio anymore because I'm always listening to a download of your show or a book or whatever that may be. So it's that's been really powerful from learning from that book.
Well, speaking of learning, as a listener to the show, that one of the things I often ask people at the end of conversations is where they failed or what they've changed their mind on over the last few years. And I get the sense you have changed your mind on a bunch in the last few years. What is something that you think today that you didn't necessarily hold to be true, 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
I've got a couple. I think the bigger one that really is what started this conversation is that, prior to this journey that we've talked about, I think I was arrogant in a way in that I felt that I didn't need to invest in my development and learning. And I felt that I was a smart guy and I was doing well. And, why did I need to do that? And I've come to realize that there's such a wealth of help that you can gain from other perspectives that, I'm not one who thinks that if I had my time again and those sort of things. I think you are where you are and you've just got to deal with that situationally. But I think that I'm at 180 degrees now. If I'm not doing something to learn every day, if I'm not if I'm not finding something that I can try, it might be a really simple thing like, I'm going to try not saying the word "but" for a week, right? Just to see how that goes. And sometimes it's a bigger thing. It's about changing a more significant part of how you conduct yourself or what you're doing as a parent, something deeper. But I think that real commitment to me to learning, and I love the phrase from Marshall Goldsmith, which was just to say, I'm a good person, but I'm a work in progress and I always will be.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, Jeff, I really appreciate all your wisdom you've shared with us and how much you've applied here. So one of the things we've been trying to do with these Saturday casts is to put together a bit of a training plan for what it looks like for those who want to go and follow a similar path to what Jeff has described here. And so I think we've mentioned 6 past episodes. So Jeff, hopefully I'll capture these well, but we've got episode 196, Creating Behavior That Lasts with Marshall Goldsmith, as Jeff just mentioned. Episode 223, Start With Why, featuring Simon Sinek. Episode 233, How to Make Deep Work Happen. That was the one with Cal Newport. Episode 241, Turning Followers into Leaders with David Marquet, former captain of the USS Santa Fe. We also had, episode 245, How to Engage with Humor. That was the one with David Nihill. And finally, where we started, Therese Huston, episode 255, How Women Make Stronger, Smarter Choices. And I should mention, even though that the word women is in the title there, I think that's an episode that's just as valuable for men on making stronger, smarter choices as well. Jeff, did I miss anything or did I hit most of what we talked about?
I think you got it all. Perfect.
Well, Jeff, I mentioned this to you, but I'll say it for everyone else. It's so fun to get to do this podcast in so many ways, but so much of my work is talking to experts and listening and asking good questions. What's really exciting for me is when I get a message from you and others in our community who have taken what they've learned, have gone out and applied it, and some really great things happen in their organizations. So thank you so much for being an inspiration to me and a motivator to continue to do what I'm doing. And thank you so much for inspiring others who I know will go back and dig into some of these principles and learn from some of these experts. I think it's going to be really valuable for others too.
Thank you, Dave. The thanks is all the other way around. I think I just want to say thank you for being, without even knowing it a lot of the time, part of my journey and really helping me.
Well, the pleasure is mine. And thank you for listening. And hey, I got a question for you listening. Do you have a success story from what you've learned on the Coaching for Leaders podcast that I should know about? If you do, I'd love to hear it. And perhaps even with your permission, share it with our listening community, maybe even here on a future Saturday cast. So if you have a success story, and you'd like me to know about it, go over to coachingforleaders.com/success to share your story with me. And this Saturday cast was brought to you by the Coaching for Leaders Academy. If you'd like to discover more about the Academy and get alerted about opportunities to apply for membership, just go over to coachingforleaders.com/academy. Hey, if you're picking up the show for the first time, this is a special episode on Saturdays. We'll be back to our normal Monday episode this coming Monday. Thanks a ton for listening, and see you on Monday for our next regular show. Take care, everybody.